I heard the crash before I saw it. The front door of my house slammed open with a force that rattled the walls. I jumped up from the couch, heart hammering in my chest, hand instinctively reaching for the badge and gun that were never far from me. But it wasn't a break-in. It was worse. It was the look in my neighbor's eyes, pure panic, that told me my world was about to collapse. "Logan," she gasped, breathless. "It's Daisy. Someone took Daisy." Everything inside me went cold. Daisy. My girl. My partner. My best friend. I stumbled to the door, half tripping over myself, forcing the words out through numb lips. "What do you mean someone took her?" "They grabbed her from your backyard," she cried, wringing her hands. "A black van, no plates. I tried to stop them. I tried." For a second, all I could hear was the roaring in my ears. I had been a cop for 12 years. I had faced down armed suspects, run into burning buildings, talked people off ledges. But nothing prepared me for this kind of fear. Daisy wasn't just a dog. She was my family. The backyard gate was wide open, swinging gently in the breeze. There were skid marks on the street, black rubber scars left by tires peeling out in a hurry. I dropped to my knees by the gate, touching the broken latch. They'd forced it open. No accident. My mind raced. Who would take her? Why? It wasn't Ransom. No one knew how much she meant to me outside of my closest friends. Couldn't be revenge. My record was clean. I hadn't made enemies. At least I didn't think I had. And Daisy, sweet, gentle Daisy, she wouldn't hurt a fly. She trusted everyone. That trust might have cost her. A lump rose in my throat. I swallowed it down and forced myself to stand. Focus. Think. I pulled out my phone, hands trembling, and dialed. 911. "What's your emergency?" "This is Officer Logan Reid," I said, voice sharper than I intended. "Badge 5471. Reporting a canine abduction from my residence. Requesting immediate dispatch and bolo for a black panel van. No plates. Last seen heading westbound on Sycamore Street." "Understood, Officer Reid. Units are on their way." I hung up before she could say more. Time was everything now. Within minutes, 2 patrol cars screeched to a halt in front of my house. Blue and red lights lit up the night. My sergeant, Carla Morris, climbed out of her cruiser, looking grim. "Jesus, Logan. You okay?" "No, I wasn't. Not until Daisy was back." "We'll find her," Carla promised, clapping a firm hand on my shoulder. "I'll call in favors if I have to. Nobody steals a cop's dog and gets away with it." I nodded, jaw clenched so hard it ached. We canvassed the street. We talked to neighbors. A few had seen the van, but no one caught a license plate. One kid, a wiry teenager named Jesse, said he saw the driver. A man, white, scruffy beard, baseball cap, nervous. It wasn't much, but it was something. By midnight, the trail was already going cold. I sat on my porch steps, head in my hands, as officers combed the area. My mind kept replaying every moment with Daisy. The way she'd leap into my lap when I got home. The way she'd nuzzle into my chest during thunderstorms. The way she wore her little K9 vest with pride. Couldn't lose her. I wouldn't. I pulled out my phone again. This time, I called someone I hadn't talked to in a long time. "Hey, it's Logan. I need a favor." There was a pause on the other end, then a gravelly laugh. Well, Logan Reid, calling me after all these years. Must be serious." "It is," I said. "I need you to find someone." The voice chuckled again, but it wasn't unkind. "Text me the details. I'll get on it." I hung up and took a deep breath. If anyone could find Daisy, it was Danny Cole, the best private tracker I'd ever known. And the most unpredictable. Danny Cole didn't waste time. Within 20 minutes, his beat-up black Jeep rumbled down my street, headlights cutting through the thick fog that had rolled in. He stepped out wearing a battered leather jacket, ripped jeans, and that same cocky grin he'd had back when we were rookies together, before he'd quit the force and gone rogue. Danny looked like trouble. He was trouble. But he was also damn good at finding what didn't want to be found. He strode up to me, hands in pockets, eyes scanning the scene like a shark scenting blood. "So," he said, his voice low, "someone's dumb enough to steal a cop's dog." "Yeah," I muttered, rising to meet him. "Her name's Daisy. She's everything." Danny's face softened for just a second, so fast most people would have missed it. But I caught it. He understood. More than most. "Tell me everything," he said. I ran him through it. Every detail, every sighting, every useless clue we'd scraped together. Danny listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally, his eyes sharp and restless. When I finished, he rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. "Van with no plates. Guy with a beard and a cap. Westbound Sycamore." "Huh." He tilted his head, thinking. "This wasn't random. Someone scoped you out. Knew when to hit." "That's what I'm afraid of," I said, feeling the tight knot of guilt in my chest twist even harder. Danny clapped me on the back. "Relax, Reid. We'll get her back." He pulled out a battered notebook, jotted something down, then whistled. Out of the Jeep bounded a huge German shepherd, jet black, eyes like molten gold. I hadn't seen Titan in years. Last I heard, Danny had rescued him after Titan got retired from military service. Titan padded up to me, sniffed my hand, and gave a low, approving woof. "If anyone can track your girl," Danny said, "it's this guy." I blinked, feeling a lump rise in my throat. Help was here. Real help. We got to work immediately. First stop, the backyard. Titan sniffed around the broken latch, the torn-up grass where Daisy had struggled, and the street where the van had peeled out. His body went stiff, muscles tensing. He had a scent. "Good boy," Danny murmured. We loaded into the Jeep, me riding shotgun, Titan in the back, and took off down Sycamore. The night air was heavy, the city eerily quiet. Danny drove like a madman, weaving through side streets, cutting through alleys, following the faint trail Titan picked up. Every now and then he would slow down, let Titan stick his head out the window, nose working furiously. Hours passed. We found nothing. But we didn't stop. Just past 3 a.m., Titan barked, a sharp, urgent sound. Danny slammed the brakes. We were on the edge of an industrial park, long-abandoned warehouses looming like skeletons in the fog. "There," Danny said, pointing. "He smells her." My heart pounded in my chest as we jumped out of the Jeep. Titan led us to a side entrance of a crumbling brick building. The metal door was half-rusted shut, but it hung slightly ajar. Danny drew a knife from his belt, not a gun, and nodded at me. "You take left. I'll take right. Keep it quiet." I nodded, my instincts kicking in. We slipped inside. The warehouse was pitch black, the only light a thin sliver of moon through broken windows. The air reeked of oil and mildew. And something else. Dog. I clutched my flashlight, sweeping the beam across stacks of old pallets and machinery. Every creak of the floorboards sounded deafening. Titan stayed close to Danny's side, growling low in his throat. Then movement. A shadow darted behind a stack of crates. Danny froze. Raised a hand. We moved in tandem, flanking the crates. A soft whimper pierced the silence. "Daisy." It was Daisy. I almost bolted forward, but Danny grabbed my arm, stopping me. His eyes said it all, trap. We edged closer. There she was, tied to a radiator with a thick rope around her neck, tail tucked, eyes wide with terror. And stepping out from behind the crates, holding a crowbar, was a man in a filthy hoodie and jeans, face twisted into a sneer. "You ain't getting her back," he spat. I saw red. But I kept my voice calm. "Let her go. You don't want this to get worse for you." He laughed, a sharp, ugly sound, and raised the crowbar. "Bad move." Titan lunged with a roar, knocking the man flat on his back before he even had time to scream. Danny was on him in seconds, pinning his arms behind him with brutal efficiency. I rushed to Daisy, heartbreaking at how skinny she felt under my hands. "It's okay, girl," I whispered, working the knot free. I'm here. She whimpered and licked my face, her whole body trembling. But she was alive. And she was coming home. Daisy wouldn't stop trembling. Even as I scooped her into my arms, even as I whispered every comforting word I could think of, her body shivered uncontrollably against mine. I could feel her heart hammering, rapid and frantic, like a bird trapped in a cage. Rage burned low in my gut, a deep, steady fire, but I forced it down. She needed calm. She needed safety. She needed me to be strong. Danny cuffed the man with smooth, practiced motions, his face a cold mask of indifference. The guy squirmed and cursed, but Danny just hauled him to his feet like he weighed nothing at all. Titan stood guard, his massive frame a wall of muscle and teeth, his growls low and continuous. No one was getting close to Daisy. Not again. "We're calling this in?" Danny asked, his voice casual but his eyes sharp. Yeah, I said, cradling Daisy closer. We do it by the book. I pulled out my phone with one hand and dialed dispatch, rattling off our location and situation in clipped, professional tones. Backup was on the way. We just had to hold tight. Minutes stretched into lifetimes. I sank to the floor with Daisy in my lap, rocking her gently, murmuring into her fur. She smelled like dirt and fear and old oil, but I didn't care. She was here. She was alive. That was all that mattered. Her tail gave a tentative thump against my leg, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I let out a shaky breath of relief. Outside, the wail of sirens split the night. Red and blue lights danced across the broken walls of the warehouse. Officers stormed in, guns drawn, eyes sweeping the shadows. When they saw me, saw Daisy, saw the cuffed suspect, the tension in the room broke like a snapped wire. Carla Morris was the first to reach me. She dropped to her knees, her face crumpling with emotion. "Jesus, Logan," she breathed. "You found her." "Yeah," I croaked, running a hand through Daisy's matted fur. "We found her." Carla didn't ask questions. She just leaned in and pressed her forehead lightly against Daisy's, whispering something too soft for me to hear. Daisy licked her cheek, and Carla smiled through tears. The suspect, later ID'd as a two-bit criminal named Kenny Stokes, with a rap sheet longer than my arm, was hauled out of the warehouse kicking and screaming. He kept yelling about how they were going to come for him, how they were watching. Danny watched him go with a faint smirk, then turned to me. "Guess he wasn't acting alone," he said, voice low. My gut twisted again, but I nodded. We weren't done. Not yet. Back at the vet's office, Daisy whimpered as the techs examined her. No broken bones. No serious injuries. Just dehydration, bruising around her neck from the rope, and a lot of fear. The vet, a kind woman named Dr. Patel, assured me Daisy would heal. Physically, at least. The emotional scars might take longer. "She's strong," Dr. Patel said, giving Daisy a gentle scratch behind the ears. "And she's lucky. She's got you." I swallowed hard and nodded. When they finally released her, I wrapped her in a soft blanket and carried her to my truck. She didn't even try to walk on her own. She just curled into me, trusting me completely, the way she always had. I buckled her in beside me, one hand never leaving her fur, even as I drove. I took her home. Home. The word felt fragile now, but it was the only thing I had to offer. I carried her inside, set her on the couch, and sat beside her. She rested her head in my lap and sighed, a deep, bone-weary sound that broke my heart all over again. I stayed there all night, one hand stroking her back, whispering promises into the dark. "I'm not letting you go again, baby girl. I swear it. You're safe. You're home." And for the first time in days, Daisy slept. So did I. The morning light was soft and golden when I woke, filtering through the blinds in warm streaks that fell across Daisy's sleeping form. For a few perfect seconds, everything felt normal. Just a lazy Sunday morning with my girl curled up beside me. But then reality came crashing back in, heavy and relentless, and I sat up with a jolt, scanning the room as if the nightmare could have somehow followed us home. Daisy stirred at the movement, lifting her head and blinking up at me with those big, trusting eyes that nearly undid me all over again. She looked better already, the stiffness in her body easing, but there was still a haunted look in her gaze that made my chest ache. I stood slowly, stretching out the knots in my back, and padded into the kitchen to start some coffee. The smell filled the house, familiar and grounding. Daisy watched me from the couch, her tail giving a tentative wag when I looked her way. I smiled, a real one, small but genuine, and poured myself a mug. I sat back down beside her, sipping the scalding liquid and just breathing. For the first time in what felt like forever, I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, we were going to be okay. The peace didn't last long. My phone buzzed on the coffee table, rattling against the wood. I grabbed it, my stomach sinking when I saw the caller ID. Carla Morris. I answered immediately. "Reid." "Logan," Carla said, her voice low and tense. "We need you at the station. Now." My gut twisted. "What's going on?" She hesitated just for a second, and that was all it took for dread to flood my veins. "Kenny Stokes is dead," she said finally. Hanged himself in his holding cell last night. The world tilted. What? I barked, nearly spilling my coffee. Daisy flinched at the sudden noise, and I forced myself to lower my voice. He was on suicide watch. He was. 2 officers on duty. Both say they stepped out for less than 5 minutes. When they came back, Carla trailed off, then sighed. It was too late. I pressed my fingers hard against my eyes, trying to force back the pounding headache already building behind them. And you think? I couldn't even finish the sentence. We think he had help, Carla confirmed grimly. And if he did, whoever took Daisy, whoever Stokes was working for, they're still out there. And they just sent us a message. I glanced at Daisy, who was watching me with quiet, unwavering loyalty. My throat tightened. I'm on my way, I said, ending the call. The station was buzzing when I arrived. Officers huddled in tight groups, whispering urgently. Desks were buried under paperwork, coffee cups, and half-eaten breakfasts abandoned mid-meal. It felt less like a workplace and more like a war room. Carla met me at the entrance, her face grim. Come on, she said, leading me down the hall. We pulled the security footage. In the observation room, a small group of detectives clustered around a monitor. On the screen, grainy black and white footage played on a loop. Kenny Stokes paced his cell like a caged animal, muttering to himself. Then, at exactly 2:17 a.m., the camera flickered. Just for a second. Barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. When the feed cleared, Kenny was sprawled on the floor, a noose fashioned from his bedsheet around his neck. Dead. I stared at the screen, a cold weight settling in my gut. Camera glitch, Carla said, her voice tight. Or someone tampered with the feed. Someone who knew exactly what they were doing, I muttered. Exactly. She crossed her arms. This wasn't just about a dog, Logan. This is bigger. I didn't need her to tell me. I could feel it in my bones. Someone had targeted Daisy, and by extension, me for a reason. And if they were willing to kill to keep their secrets, it meant we were dealing with something a hell of a lot darker than petty crime. It meant we were just getting started. Later that afternoon, I sat on my porch steps with Daisy at my feet, watching the sun sink low in the sky. The golden hour painted everything in hues of fire and honey, so beautiful it hurt to look at. Daisy rested her head on my boot, her eyes half closed, trusting me to keep her safe. I made a silent vow right then and there. Whatever it took, however long it took, I would uncover the truth. Not just for Daisy. Not just for myself. But because somewhere out there, the people responsible thought they could get away with this. They were wrong. Dead wrong. The next few days felt like moving through molasses, thick, slow, suffocating. Every moment that passed without an answer gnawed at me, the silence screaming louder than any siren. Daisy stuck to my side like glue. She wouldn't eat unless I was in the room. Wouldn't sleep unless my hand was resting on her back. Every loud noise made her flinch, every stranger made her shrink. Seeing her like that, so small, so unsure, tore something out of me that I didn't know how to replace. I spent every waking hour poring through files, camera footage, police records. I called in every favor I had, chased every lead that even smelled like relevance. Danny helped when he could, though he had his own way of operating, shadowy contacts, backroom meetings, names written on scraps of napkins. And while I didn't always understand his methods, I couldn't deny the man got results. On the third night, he called me from a payphone on the east side. I didn't even know there were payphones left in the city. Meet me at the old shipping yard by Pier 9. Come alone. Then he hung up. I stared at my phone for a second, heart thudding, then grabbed my jacket. Daisy looked up from her spot by the fireplace, ears perked, body tensing. I'll be back soon, girl, I said softly, crouching to stroke her ear. Promise. She whimpered, and I felt that now familiar tug of guilt anchor in my chest, but I turned and left. Some things couldn't wait. Pier 9 had been abandoned for years. The warehouses, there were husks of their former selves, broken windows, graffiti-splattered walls, the scent of salt and rust clinging to the air. Danny was leaning against a rusted container, cigarette in hand, his expression unreadable. You're late, he muttered as I approached. You're always vague, I shot back. He cracked a smile but didn't argue. Instead, he handed me a manila envelope. I opened it slowly, my fingers tingling with anticipation or maybe dread. Inside were photos. Dozens of them. Men with military-style haircuts and expensive suits. Unmarked trucks pulling up to nondescript buildings. Daisy, my Daisy, being loaded into a van by 2 men in gloves. What the hell is this? I asked, voice tight. They're part of a group, Danny said. Private. Off books. Real hush-hush. Used to run military K-9 trials and training back in the day until they got cut off from funding. But some of those guys didn't let go. They started a private network. Breeding, training, selling. To the highest bidder. Black market stuff. My stomach turned. You're telling me they're trafficking dogs? Not just dogs, he said grimly. War dogs. Dogs with a record. Trained K-9s. They steal them, wipe their chips, recondition them, and sell them to private security outfits, cartels, even rogue governments. And Daisy. He pointed to one of the photos. She's got a clean track record, perfect obedience, and trust issues that make her easier to manipulate. She was the ideal mark. I stared at the photos while rising in my throat. The rage that bubbled up this time wasn't wild or hot. It was cold. Focused. Lethal. Why Stokes? I asked. Danny shrugged. Small-time punk. Local thief. Probably just a contractor. They toss guys like him a few grand to grab the target and deliver it. Then they disappear him. The hanging? Classic cleanup job. Someone inside helped. I felt the pieces sliding into place like a sick puzzle. And the guy in the cap? The one Jesse saw? Danny pulled out another photo. It was grainy, but I recognized the face immediately. Officer Pete Travers. He worked 2 floors down from me. Quiet. Polite. Bland as boiled rice. And, apparently, a traitor. I clenched my fists so hard my knuckles cracked. This goes deep, Danny said. Too deep for your department to handle clean. You go after this head-on, they'll bury it. And you. You need to be smart, Logan. I folded the photos back into the envelope, heart pounding. No, I said, turning toward the city skyline. I need to be fast. I had names now. I had faces. And I had nothing left to lose. This wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. For Daisy. For every dog they stole. And for every man who thought he could touch what I loved and get away with it. The next morning, I walked into the precinct like a man on fire. Calm on the outside, but burning with a quiet, focused rage that I hadn't felt in years. Every step echoed through the hallway like a war drum. Officers nodded at me as I passed, oblivious to the storm I was dragging in behind me. My badge was clipped to my belt, my sidearm holstered, and that envelope Danny gave me felt like it weighed 10 pounds in my hand. Part of me wanted to storm into Travers' office, throw the photos on the desk, and demand an explanation. Another part, the smarter part, knew that wouldn't get me anything but a quick shutdown. If he really was involved in something this big, he'd already have an escape plan. People like that always do. So I played it quiet. I walked past his desk without a word, just a glance. He wasn't there. Figures. The guy had probably already sensed the heat. But I noticed something then: his computer was still on. Unlocked. Careless. Or maybe just arrogant. My hands were sweating when I slid into the chair. My heart thundered in my ears. I wasn't technically breaking any laws yet, but I knew what this looked like. I also knew I didn't give a damn. I pulled up his browser history. Deleted. Email inbox empty. No recent outgoing messages. But he'd been printing documents from a USB drive and the timestamps were fresh. Less than 2 hours ago. That's when I spotted it, an access log to the evidence room. Travers had signed in at 6:03 a.m. That was before his shift was even supposed to start. And it wasn't a quick drop-off. He'd spent almost 20 minutes inside. I stood, adrenaline surging. 20 minutes in the evidence room for what? A cleanup job? Destroying links? Hiding something? I stormed downstairs, flashing my badge to the guy at the desk. Need access, I said, already moving. Emergency check. Open it. The officer hesitated, then buzzed me in. Inside, the cool fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead, illuminating rows and rows of lockers and shelves. I moved fast, scanning every tag, every cabinet door, every digital lock. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for until I found it. A sealed evidence bag marked OP #6471D, an old narcotics bust I remembered from years ago. Nothing major. Except that wasn't what was in the bag. Instead of powder or pills, it held a flash drive. Brand new. No label. Still warm, like it had just been placed. I grabbed it, slipped it into my pocket, and walked out without a word. Back at home, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, Daisy curled up at my feet. The second I plugged in the drive, a folder popped up. Inside were video files. Dozens. Each one named with a series of numbers and letters. I clicked on the first one. The footage was grainy and colorless, obviously shot from a hidden camera. It showed a concrete room, bare except for a single steel cage in the center. Inside the cage, a German shepherd paced back and forth, panting, tail down. The timestamp read from 2 months ago. A voice off-screen called out commands, harsh, rapid-fire. The dog obeyed, flinching with every word. I watched 5 minutes. Then 10. My stomach turned. It wasn't training. It was conditioning. Torture dressed up as obedience. The next file showed a transaction. A man in a suit shaking hands with another, money-changing hands. And behind them, another cage. Another dog. Muzzled. Shaking. I clicked file after file. Faces blurred, voices distorted, but the pattern was clear. This was a business. A well-oiled, merciless machine turning loyalty and innocence into weapons. And Travers? He appeared in the 4th video. Clear as day. Smiling. I sat back in my chair, dizzy with disgust. I had them. And they had no idea. Danny was already waiting when I pulled into the parking lot behind his Jeep that night. He took one look at my face and nodded. You got something? I got everything. We sat in the dark, reviewing the footage together. Danny didn't say a word through most of it, but his jaw tightened, his fists clenched. By the time the last file ended, the air between us was electric. We leaked this, I said, voice low. We could blow it open. Shut the whole thing down. Danny looked at me sideways. You trust your people not to bury it? No. He grinned. Then we go around them. And just like that, we had a plan. We wouldn't wait for permission. We wouldn't knock on doors politely. We'd take it to someone who couldn't be bought. Someone who still believed in truth, in justice, in the kind of law that didn't sell out behind closed doors. We'd take it to the press. But first, we had to make sure Daisy stayed safe. Because the second this went public, they'd come looking. Not just for me, but for her. The next 48 hours were a blur of movement, strategy, and quiet paranoia. I kept Daisy close, barely letting her out of my sight even for a second. Every creak of the floorboards, every passing car outside made my shoulders tense, made me reach instinctively for the Glock on my hip. I knew the kind of people we were dealing with now. And I knew how they responded to threats. Fast. Quiet. Permanent. But I also knew that once the story was out, once the footage hit the public, there would be nowhere for them to hide. The light would burn them. But getting there without getting us killed? That was the tricky part. Danny worked his own channels. He was good at disappearing, at keeping things quiet until it was time to make noise. He set up a meeting with an old journalist friend of his, someone who'd been blacklisted from 2 networks for being too aggressive with the truth. I liked the sound of that. Her name was Erin Maddox, and from the moment she walked into the coffee shop, I could tell she wasn't interested in playing games. Mid-30s, sharp eyes behind black-rimmed glasses, notepad already out before she even ordered her drink. You're the cop? She asked, sliding into the booth across from me. Logan Reid, I nodded, setting the envelope on the table. Everything's in here. Names. Faces. Transactions. Video evidence. Erin didn't even flinch. She flipped open the first page, eyes scanning rapidly, jaw tightening the farther she read. When she hit the image of Travers standing beside one of the cages, she stopped cold. He's a cop, she muttered. Active duty? I nodded once. Her gaze flicked up to mine, razor sharp. This story's going to burn the city to the ground. I'm counting on it. She sat back, folding her arms. You realize, the second this runs, you're done. Career over. You'll be labeled a whistleblower, a rogue. You won't get another badge in this country. I'm not doing this for my badge. Her eyes narrowed, curious. Then why? I reached down and scratched Daisy behind the ears. She was sitting quietly beside me, her tail thumping softly against the vinyl seat, eyes calm but alert. Erin followed my gaze. For her, I said simply. And for every dog like her. For every canine they turned into property. For every officer who trusted them with their partners. This doesn't stop until we rip it out by the roots. There was a long silence. Then Erin nodded once, slowly. Okay, I'll run it. But not through any corporate outlet. This goes indie. Full release. Web, darknet backups, mirrored servers. Once it's out there for good. Do it. She stood, slid the folder into her bag, and extended a hand. You've just started a war, Officer Reid. I know. That night, I barely slept. Every sound outside made me flinch. Every shadow felt like a threat. I kept Daisy close, her body curled into mine like a living shield. She was sleeping better now, her breathing steadier, her dreams quieter. But I knew the calm wouldn't last. Not once they realized what we'd done. The upload went live at 6:03 a.m. the next morning. The fallout started at 6:04. First came the messages. Anonymous numbers. One-word threats. Retract. Silence. Stop. Then came the drive-by, a black car cruising past my house at 10 miles an hour, windows tinted too dark for legal comfort, lingering just long enough to be noticed. Danny called at noon. You need to move. Now. I'm not running. You're not running, he agreed. You're strategically relocating. There's a difference. Get Daisy. Come to my place. I've got eyes on every entrance and a basement nobody's ever been able to find unless I let them. I hesitated, pride warring with instinct. Then I looked at Daisy, who was dozing in a patch of sunlight, blissfully unaware of the storm rolling in. We packed that afternoon. No uniforms. No badges. Just the two of us and a bag of essentials. Danny met us on the edge of town in a forested stretch that looked abandoned to anyone who didn't know better. His house, if you could even call it that, was half buried in the hillside, reinforced, wired with cameras, alarms, and who knows what else. It looked like a doomsday bunker with a coffee machine. Daisy padded in like she'd been there before, sniffed every corner, then laid down near the fireplace like it was her throne. Danny handed me a beer, sat down across from me, and said nothing for a while. Just stared into the flames. Finally he spoke. You know they'll come. I'm counting on it, I said. Not just for you, he added, his voice low. For her too. I nodded slowly. I know. But we weren't going down easy. Not this time. They came at 3:11 in the morning. No warning. No subtlety. Just the sound of gravel crunching under tires and the faint flicker of headlights through the trees. Danny had been right, whoever these people were, they didn't waste time. The story had been live for less than 24 hours and already they were moving like trained ghosts through the night, banking on fear, on surprise, on sheer brute force to shut us up. But they didn't know us. Not really. And they sure as hell didn't know Daisy. Danny had been awake already, perched in a chair by the window, a rifle across his lap and a smirk on his face like he'd been waiting for this moment. I was on the couch, Daisy pressed close against my legs, her ears twitching at the distant rumble of engines. The second I heard them cut, I was up, moving like instinct had taken the wheel. I didn't need orders. I didn't need a plan. I just needed to protect her. Danny flicked off the lights and we fell into shadow. The house was silent, save for the quiet hum of the surveillance monitors and the ticking of an old grandfather clock that suddenly sounded like a war drum. Outside, 4 figures emerged from the tree line, dressed in black, heads covered, moving in tight formation like they'd done this before. They had weapons. They had coordination. They thought they were predators. But this was our territory. Danny slid me a radio earpiece and spoke in a whisper so calm it could have frozen blood. They're not here to talk. I nodded. Then we don't answer. We moved through the house like shadows, hitting our positions. Danny disappeared into the back hallway, his steps silent on the reinforced flooring. I took cover near the kitchen, behind an overturned table and a pane of bulletproof glass he'd casually installed just in case. Daisy stayed low beside me, every muscle taut, but her eyes locked on me, steady and sure. The first bang came against the back door, hard and fast, like a battering ram. Then another. Then, boom. A flashbang lit up the kitchen like a sun had been dropped from the ceiling. I turned away just in time, teeth clenched, ears ringing, but my vision held. Daisy didn't flinch. She'd been trained to handle worse. But my hands were already on my weapon, my heart racing like a drumline in my chest. 3 men stormed through the smoke, moving fast, guns raised. I fired once, a clean warning shot into the air. Step back. I shouted. You're trespassing on private property. Law enforcement has been notified. One of them laughed. That's when I realized they were law enforcement. Or had been. Maybe private contractors now. Mercs in cheap armor, bought with black money and stripped down morals. They didn't back off. Danny struck first. A sharp report rang out from the hall. One of them went down hard, howling as a beanbag round hit him square in the chest. Danny didn't play for blood, not unless he had to. But he played for keeps. The second guy turned, shouting, and I saw his face clearly for the first time. Travers. Officer Pete Travers. The snake in our midst. I froze. Not in fear, but in calculation. Seeing him here confirmed everything. He wasn't just dirty. He was in this. Deep. Too deep to crawl back. He saw me too. And he smiled. You should have stayed quiet, Reid, he called out. You should have let the dog go. I stood, calm and steady, gun leveled right at his chest. You came into the wrong house, I said. Then Daisy did something I didn't expect. She stepped forward. Not growling. Not attacking. Just standing. Her body between me and Travers. Her eyes never leaving his. As if she remembered his scent. As if she knew exactly who had tied her to that radiator and left her in the dark. And in that moment, Travers faltered. Because nothing looks at you the way a dog does when it remembers what you did to it. Danny took the opening. The second Travers flinched, Danny was on him, disarmed, cuffed, and face down in the dirt before he could even draw breath. The third man fled. Smartest move he'd made all night. It was over. But the air was still buzzing. I dropped to my knees beside Daisy, pulled her close, pressed my forehead against hers. "You did good," I whispered. "You did so good." She licked my chin once, soft and slow. We sat there in the dark, surrounded by smoke and silence, and for the first time in days I felt something I hadn't dared to believe in. Hope. By sunrise, Travers was in cuffs and the world had changed. Danny called in a quiet favor, an old friend from Federal Internal Affairs who owed him a life and a half. Within hours, Travers was pulled into an unmarked van with blacked-out windows and driven somewhere no badge could protect him. He wouldn't be making calls. He wouldn't be cutting deals. He wouldn't be hurting anyone ever again. But I didn't feel triumph. Not yet. Because I knew that Travers was just a foot soldier. A cog in the machine. And machines don't die when you break one gear. Daisy was exhausted. She hadn't left my side the entire night, not even when the alarms went off, not when the lights flashed, not when the air was thick with gunpowder and tension. She was my shadow. My guardian. And in so many ways, the strongest soul in the room. I curled up with her on the floor near Danny's wood stove while he cleaned up the broken entryway with the kind of calm that only came from years of chaos. He didn't talk much. He never did. But there was something quiet and solid in the way he moved, something that said, "You're not alone." The story had gone viral overnight. Erin had kept her promise. News outlets across the country were now picking it up. Canine trafficking ring exposed, police complicity alleged. Hashtags were trending. Photos of Daisy in uniform, of me holding her at an award ceremony 3 years ago, were now circulating with captions like, "Hero dog betrayed by the system she served." The world had latched onto her story, not mine, not Danny's, not even the investigation. Hers. And that was exactly what I had hoped for. Because people can ignore statistics. They can scroll past numbers. But they can't ignore the eyes of a dog that just wanted to serve and be loved. Daisy had become a symbol. A heartbeat in a world too quick to look away. By noon, the station was in full meltdown. Internal Affairs had stormed the building. Warrants were flying. Offices were getting swept. Files pulled. Phones seized. Carla called me from a burner line, voice tight but steady. "You did it," she said. "Whatever it costs, just know it was worth it." "I didn't do it alone," I replied, glancing down at Daisy, who was sprawled out on her side now, finally relaxed, finally breathing easy. Carla hesitated. "There's a list." "It's bad, Logan. Cops. Officials. Even a judge in the county circuit. They were laundering money through a non-profit meant for retired K9s, selling the dogs they claimed were adopted or euthanized. You gave us everything we needed. We've got a grand jury already being assembled." The world tilted again. My mouth went dry. How long was this going on? I asked. Years. Maybe a decade. Hidden in plain sight. And I'd never seen it. I'd trusted those uniforms, those oaths. I'd worn the same badge. But the rot had been growing beneath our feet while we smiled for press conferences and shook hands at parades. I ended the call and went outside. The forest was still damp with the morning dew, but the air was crisp and clear. I let Daisy run a little, just enough to stretch her legs, just enough to feel the wind again. She didn't go far. She'd look over her shoulder every few seconds, making sure I was still there. Still watching. Still safe. She didn't trust the world anymore. Not completely. But she trusted me. And that was something I would never take for granted again. Danny joined me a few minutes later, tossing me a thermos of black coffee so strong it might have peeled paint. We didn't say much. Just stood there, shoulder to shoulder, watching the trees sway. "You know they'll try to bury this," he said eventually. "Clean it up, blame it on 1 or 2 bad apples, and move on." "I know. But it's out now. It's public. You can't silence a million voices." I nodded, gripping the thermos tighter. "Then we make sure they keep screaming." He chuckled. "Now you're thinking like me." That afternoon Erin called. Her voice was full of fire. "We're getting threats already. Server attacks, bots flooding the site. But we're not backing down. You're going to be on every screen in the country within 24 hours. I just need one thing from you." "What's that?" "An interview. You. Daisy. The whole story. In your own words." I looked at my girl, who was curled on the porch beside me, tail wagging softly in her sleep. "Okay," I said. "But I'm not the story." "She is," Erin agreed. "And they're going to love her. So the world would hear it. All of it. From the beginning. Because what they did to her, what they tried to do to all of them, was unforgivable. And it would never be hidden again." The interview was set for the following evening, off the grid, in a neutral location that Danny personally scouted and swept. An abandoned barn on the edge of a forgotten farmstead, miles from any paved road, wrapped in tall wheat and the smell of dust and time. Aaron arrived in an unmarked sedan with nothing but a camera, a recorder, and the kind of expression that said she hadn't slept in days but would run straight through fire to get the truth out. She didn't bring a crew. She didn't need one. This wasn't for theatrics. It was for truth. Raw, unedited, and heavy enough to break bones. Daisy sat next to me the whole time, her body relaxed but her eyes alert. The camera loved her. Aaron captured her just as she was, unpolished, quiet, noble in that way only dogs can be. There was no need to embellish her story. The scars on her neck, the slight limp in her hind leg, the way she looked toward me before every answer, I didn't have to say much. She spoke without words. Aaron began softly. No theatrics. Just real questions. When did you realize something was wrong? I stared past the camera, out through the barn's broken window where the light cut through like golden knives. The memories were still sharp. Still fresh. When I found the gate open, I said. And Daisy was gone. That moment, every breath I'd ever taken before felt worthless. Like the world had stopped making sense. She let the silence sit. And when you found her? She didn't bark. Didn't cry. She just looked at me. Like she'd been waiting. Like she knew I'd come for her, but she wasn't sure I still would. Erin's throat moved, but she said nothing. We went deeper. About the ring. The stolen dogs. The conditioning. The fact that government contractors had turned K9 units into commodities, sold to war zones, to cartels, to the highest bidder. About the cops who knew. The judges who looked away. About Travers. About how trust dies not with a bang, but with a handshake behind a locked door. When it was over, Erin didn't say anything for a while. She just looked at Daisy, then back at me. You know this will cost you everything. I nodded. Let it. She paused, her fingers tightening on the camera. You'll be a target. I already am. Aaron stood, eyes hard, voice soft. Then let's make it worth it. The footage aired in full at 6 p.m. on a Friday. Prime time. It opened with Daisy's face, eyes calm, steady, golden in the dying light of that barn. Then it cut to me sitting beside her, the sun behind my shoulder and the weight of the world in my voice. There were no commercial breaks. No dramatic music. Just the truth. For 42 minutes, America sat still. Phones buzzed. Screens lit up. Social media erupted. And for the first time in my life, I saw something shift. Not just sympathy. Rage. People were angry. Genuinely, fiercely, publicly angry. Hashtags turned into movements. Petitions turned into legislative demands. Thousands of people flooded shelters asking to adopt retired K9s. Police departments nationwide were suddenly flooded with scrutiny. Transparency policies were introduced overnight. Whistleblowers from other states began stepping forward. It wasn't just about Daisy anymore. It was about all of them. And the house of cards was starting to fall. 2 days later, I was formally suspended. Carla delivered the papers herself, her face unreadable as she handed me the envelope. You knew this was coming, she said. I did. You're not the villain in this story, Logan. I'm not the hero either. She hesitated, then stepped forward and pulled me into a tight hug. Doesn't matter. You did the right thing. I just wish it didn't come with this much blood. I didn't answer. Some truths were too heavy for words. That night, I sat on the porch with Daisy, the world outside our little sanctuary still spinning with chaos and fire. But in that moment, everything was still. She rested her head on my knee, sighing that deep, soul-settling sigh that told me no matter what the world thought, she was okay. And that was enough. For now. The fallout spread like a wildfire that couldn't be contained. One station collapsed under the weight of internal investigations. Another department, 2 states over, discovered a similar pattern of misplaced K9 units, dogs that had supposedly retired yet never showed up at the homes they were adopted into. Phone records connected officers across state lines, emails surfaced, and just like that, a network of corruption that had stayed hidden for years began to unravel. It was no longer about just one precinct, one man, or even one stolen dog. It was a movement. And it all traced back to a single trigger, Daisy's eyes on that screen, steady and silent, bearing witness without a single word. I started receiving messages. Hundreds of them. From cops. From veterans. From dog handlers across the country. Men and women who had lost partners, who had been told their dogs had passed during retirement but had always felt something didn't add up. Some of the messages broke me open. Stories of dogs reassigned to private security, never seen again. Others who had vanished during transit from base to home, all written off as clerical errors or unfortunate accidents. But now, the illusion had cracked. And all that grief, all that fury was flooding through the cracks like water through a broken dam. One message hit harder than the rest. It came from a former Marine named Cole Andrews out of Nevada. His dog, Tank, had served with him through 2 tours in Afghanistan. Saved his life more times than he could count. When Cole was medically discharged, he filed the adoption paperwork to bring Tank home. But 2 days before the dog was supposed to be flown stateside, Cole got a call from command. Tank had suffered a stress-related seizure and died in transit. But Cole had always felt in his gut that something wasn't right. Tank had been healthy, strong, no prior issues. Now, after watching the story about Daisy, he wasn't so sure. He attached a photo to the message of him and Tank side by side in the desert, both covered in dust but smiling like they had the whole world behind them. I stared at that photo for a long time and then I made a decision. This wouldn't stop with exposure. It wouldn't end with names and indictments. This had to be bigger. A campaign. A reckoning. A system-wide overhaul. I called Erin. We need to do more, I said. Not just blow the whistle. We need to create a place where this never happens again. She was quiet for a moment. What are you thinking? A foundation, I said. For retired K9s. Real tracking. Real care. Full transparency. Public access to every adoption, every transfer, every retirement file. A watchdog for the watchdogs. Her voice was a whisper when she replied. You want to fix what they broke. I want to make sure nobody ever breaks it again. Erin was all in. Within 72 hours, she'd helped launch the site. Daisy's Law was trending in all 50 states. Donations poured in from every corner of the country, enough to fund legal teams, hire former handlers, and build a network of sanctuary spaces for K9s too traumatized to be placed into homes immediately. And at the heart of it all was one name. One face. Daisy. The dog who wouldn't give up. The dog who wouldn't be forgotten. Of course, the threats didn't stop. If anything, they grew more persistent. Emails. Anonymous calls. Once, a brick through Danny's mailbox with a single word painted on it in red. Enough. But we weren't scared anymore. Not after what we'd been through. Not with half the country watching. Danny responded by adding another camera and installing floodlights around his entire perimeter. I responded by filing a lawsuit against the state and the Department for systemic negligence. Not because I thought I'd win, but because it would force discovery. Force depositions. Force the truth into rooms that couldn't hide it anymore. And every night, after the headlines faded and the world settled for a few hours, I sat with Daisy on that porch, her head resting in my lap, the stars overhead so wide and silent it felt like we were the only ones left in the world. But we weren't alone. Not anymore. We had voices now. Allies. People who believed again. And for the first time in my life, I didn't care that I no longer had a badge. Because I had something better. I had purpose. And I had her. In the weeks that followed, the landscape of my life changed so completely, I barely recognized the man I used to be. I wasn't patrolling streets anymore or logging reports at a desk. I wasn't a cog in the machine I once believed in. But for the first time in over a decade, I was waking up without that slow, crushing weight of compromise on my chest. I had stepped off the safe path out into the unknown, and somehow it had given me air again. Truth has a way of cutting you open, but it also lets the poison out. The foundation grew faster than any of us had imagined. Volunteers from across the country offered to foster retired K9s. Former officers donated time, skills, even pensions. Trainers who had once worked under the military system stepped forward, risking everything to expose what they had seen. We weren't just a voice now, we were a force. A living, breathing resistance to the kind of quiet evil that thrives in the dark corners of institutions. And at the heart of it all was Daisy, still with me every step, her presence a kind of gravity that pulled everything together. She was healing. I could see it in the way she moved now, more confident, less cautious. She chased birds across Danny's property with clumsy joy, her tongue lolling out the side of her mouth like a puppy again. But she still had those moments. Late at night, when the wind picked up and the trees moaned against the windows, I'd feel her body tense beside mine. She'd lift her head, ears twitching, eyes scanning the shadows. No sound. No intruders. But the memory of fear lives deep in creatures like her. In creatures like me. And when she trembled, I didn't say anything. I just wrapped my arm around her and waited until the shaking stopped. One morning, I got a call from Carla. She was out of uniform now, too. Had taken early retirement after the pressure of the investigation started closing in around her. Too many old friends implicated. Too many betrayals. But she still carried herself like a leader. Her voice on the line was steady, but there was a tremor underneath that told me she wasn't just calling to chat. "You should come down to the courthouse," she said. "For what?" "There's someone here you'll want to see." When I arrived, I found her standing in the hall outside a courtroom with 2 U.S. Marshals flanking a prisoner in cuffs and leg shackles. The man was older than I remembered, thinner, grayer, but the eyes were the same, cold, calculating. His name was Arthur Bellamy. He'd been a regional operations commander for a private military contracting firm. The same firm that had legally acquired dozens of former K-9 units, using falsified records and corrupt middlemen like Travers to build their pipeline. Bellamy had been untouchable for years, but after the investigation cracked open, his name had landed right at the center of it all. "You got him?" I said quietly,